Since 2017, the Italian Wine Podcast has exploded and expects to hit 6 million listens by the end of July 2023. We're celebrating this success by recognizing those who have shared the journey with us and giving them the opportunity to contribute to the ongoing success of the shows. By buying a paper copy of the Italian Wine Unplugged 2.0 or making a donation to help the ongoing running costs, members of the international Italian wine community will be given the chance to nominate future guests and even enter a prize draw to have lunch with Stevie Kim and Professor Attilio Scienza. To find out more, visit us at italianwinepodcast.com. Chin chin!
Italian Wine Podcast is delighted to present the series of highlights from the 2022 Wine2wine Business Forum, focusing on wine communication and bringing together the most influential speakers in the sectors to discuss the hottest topics facing the wine industry today. Don't forget to tune in every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central European Time or visit wine2wine.net for more information.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea. Very excited to be here at Wine2Wine, and which I thank for inviting me here as a speaker. And today, as you can see from the title of today's presentation, this is going to be quite controversial. So there's a saying in Chinese, which is, no winter lasts forever. But boy, I can tell you, we've been looking to the end of this winter and to the spring for a very long time in China. So we are living through a difficult time. And, first of all, when you think about China, you really always want to look at the larger picture, look at the big picture. And as some of you may know, last month in October, this is what happened in China. This is the National Congress, and the 7 men you can see here are the Standing Committee of China's Politburo, headed by President Xi, which is the man you see in the middle, and his very close affiliates. So this is a pivotal moment which happens every 5 years and really sort of sets the trend and, expectation for whatever is going to happen within the Chinese society and therefore the economy for the foreseeable future. So President Xi came out as once again the winner. He's going to run the country for another 5 years, and all these other 6 men that you see here on this picture are his very close affiliates, and some people probably say cronies. Let's take a quick look at some fundamental data about China. So 1.5 billion people. Population growth rate is not great at the moment. We'll dive into that later. And GDP per capita is about 17K USD per year. If you look at the GDP closely, there's an interesting trend that you can notice, especially if you look at 2020, 2021, 2022. So the blue part of the pie is consumer spend. And as you can see, consumer spend has rebounded in 2021, but is suffering very heavily in 2022. And this is the forecast for the end of the year. That was quite optimistic by the World Bank. This data were released a few months ago. Now, the latest forecast by the World Bank is actually, we are looking to a drop in Chinese GDP growth from 8% in 2021 to 2.8% in 2022. 2.8% is actually not bad if you consider, Europe, a country like Italy or Germany or Spain. But for China, this is certainly below standard if you compare this performance to their, past 25 years. This is a very important slide, and it really tells you a story that, not many people are aware of. China 1990, China 2022. Demographics. One data, which is, to me, it's really scary. In 1990, the median age of the Chinese population was 19 years old. In 2022, it's 39. That means that within the last 30 years, the country has aged by 20 years. This is a crazy crazy data that gives you really a perspective on China. If you take the US, for example, back in 1990, the average age, the median age was 32 years old, and in 2022, it's 38. So within the same amount of time, China has aged twice as fast as the US. And this really, tells a story about what's happening in this country. So aging population. This is FDI for indirect investment, changes in ownerships of bond and stocks. The blue lines that you see at the end of the chart, it's basically outflows of capital from China. So those who can are divesting and trying to get out of China in terms of investment and financial decisions, which is certainly not another positive data. Logistics, for those of you who are slightly familiar with China, you know that China is running a very strict zero COVID policy, which is really impacting the economy. And this is very evident if you look at logistics. And the chart shows what happened in a few key cities in the quarter two of 2022 this year. They had a really, really serious and strict lockdown in Shanghai, which is the red line you see above me. And that's what happens when you enact a strict lockdown in China. So virtually, if you have only a few cases of COVID in a given district, in a given city, there's going to be a very strict and immediate lockdown with everybody's going to get tested. It's super super serious and strict, and that's what happens to logistics. So our importers had issues shipping wines in and out of the bonded warehouse they have. They had issues delivering wines. No manpower to run trucks, no manpower to run logistics. It was a nightmare. Stock markets. I think Hong Kong, Shanghai. The picture really says it all. So I don't think I really have to comment this further. And I want to outline the key challenges that producers are facing. Also, the key challenges the countries is facing at this stage. I think unemployment rate is something that you will never think really it's a problem for China. But then if you look at the major cities, unemployment rate at this stage in 2022 is up to 6%. If you look at the younger part of the younger segment of the population, so those aged between 19 to 24 years old, the estimates are up to 17, 18%, which is really massive if you think about unemployment average unemployment in other countries. Closure of international borders still ongoing. If you want to get into China right now, it's actually very tough. You do really need to have your papers in order, and you're still required to do a fairly long hotel quarantine. And this, of course, is discouraging travel into China and outside of China. So the lack of Chinese tourism for Asian markets has been a very important feature. And Chinese are big spenders when they travel. They spend a lot on duty-free goods, especially on luxury items, and this is all stopped since the end of 2019. Zero COVID policy, we saw what that does to the economy, is certainly something not good. And overall, as you can imagine, consumer sentiment and the propensity to spend has really diminished. So there's less going out and less gathering on average. On one side, you're uncertain. People are uncertain about their income at this stage, and when you go out, there's always a risk that you may be infected to some extent, and that's really a major hassle that you have to go through if that happens to you in Shanghai or in any other city in China. So, what does this imply for the wine market? This is a snapshot that IWSR has painted in about the Chinese wine market, the Chinese alcohol market in 2021. So as we can see, the whole pie is alcohol market. Wine is only about 5% of this, And the latest estimates tells us that this 5% is equal to roughly 289 million cases, 9 liter, which is, if I'm correct me if I'm mistaken, Andrea, but it's probably around half of the size of the US market. Um, the vast majority of these 289 million cases are Chinese wine, anyhow. So that's something that we have to factorize. In terms of growth of different categories, as we can see, wine is really lagging behind in the past 5 years, and certainly also the outlook for 2021 to 2026 that IWSR has painted is not that positive. Whereas we see that other categories are slightly, growing or doing fairly better. So let's focus on China wine imports. We have seen that the vast majority of wine sold and consumed in China is Chinese wine. So what about imported wine? This is the picture of wine imports in the past 5 years. So 2017 was probably a time when the market had peaked, and then, as you can see, it's really been downhill from there. Um, and if we zero into this data and we look, for example, at wine import value, just look at the first line. And this is, first 6 months of the year-on-year data, 19 to 22. 2020 was a disaster, minus 30%. 2021 -6, so not too bad. 2022 we are looking at minus 13 again over a very weak 21. So once again, the picture here for imported wine is certainly not that exciting, to say the least. If we look at volume, the situation is even worse. So it's minus 19% on year-on-year data. There are some categories that are actually doing well in this landscape. First and foremost is Chinese premium Baijiu. Baijiu, for those of you who travel to China. By the way, let me ask you a question. How many of you have been to China? Okay. Okay, that's not too bad.
How many of you has tasted baijiu? You're still alive. That's
That's
surprising.
very good. That's very good. That's very good. So premium Baijiu is it's almost like gold for us in when times are difficult. That's the sort of commodity that people will look for and invest some funds in if they have a chance to do so. So premium Baijiu, including launch of new premium Baijiu brands and diversion of risk over a Baijiu-driven portfolio, has been a feature that we have seen happening with many, many wine importers that diversified into spirits and especially into Baijiu. Cognac is an old love of the Chinese market, so it's always a very strong category. And then we have seen some growth in specific categories such as craft beer, ready-to-drink items, and sake, which is actually quite popular. What is changing in China? Certainly, thanks to the pandemic, we have seen more consumers drinking at home, so purchasing bottles that actually open and consume at home, and this is actually a positive trend. Uh, Patriotic consumption. What does this mean? So there's a plan that the Chinese administration has in place, according to which wines coming from Ningxia, which is a very premium region, I will say, within the Chinese wine landscape, um, Chinese wines from Ningxia will have to hit 600 million bottles by 2035, which is a very ambitious target, but certainly doable. And you can really see that wines coming from this region, if you ever have a chance to taste and try some of the premium brands, are actually quite serious and very well made compared to even 5 or 6, 7 years ago. So there's an increase and there's a premiumization in Chinese wines, which is certainly a very interesting trend. In terms of imported wines, we have seen some steps that Champagne has taken. Still a very niche category in China. Champagne is not big in China, but starting to be there. Mostly female-driven consumption, interestingly. And Burgundy has really been the star in the Chinese market for the past 2 years. So Burgundy is really hot in the market at the moment, and these wines are all sold in very small allocated quantities, small offerings, and it's really very hard to find stock of valuable brands. Very interesting trend that we saw happening in places such as Shanghai is the popping up of natural wine bars. So, who will ever think? But it's somehow natural wines have been popularized by the sommelier community and certainly by the trade. And it's not uncommon to find wine bars that are themed according to this natural wine concept. Very very funky, very young crowds. Young and dynamic, and actually sustainable business models, which to me, if you had asked me this question, is natural wine ever going to be a thing in China 5 years ago, I would have said never. But they proved me wrong. And certainly for those of you who have had a chance to travel to smaller cities within China, what they call tier 2 and 3 cities, it was very hard to find places where you could buy and consume wine on the spot, such as wine bars, so wine theme outlets. You can see more of these places popping up now. So even if when you go outside of Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, the main city, you get to see more of these wine bars, which are actually a pretty interesting sign. It's a very positive development. So how does the tier city system work? This is quite an important feature of China. So most of the consumption historically for imported wine has been along the coast and in tier 1 cities that are Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen. And so traditionally, this is really where most of the wine consumption took place. These cities usually will have higher number of expats, higher income, and certainly more exposure to people who travel, and therefore are more used to Western sort of consumption patterns. In recent years, however, there's more consumers that we just highlighted in tier 2 and 3 cities that are just getting close to drink and consume wine. In terms of wine importers landscape, I think there's a clear trend. There's a sort of rationalization happening in the market. And we can see that the number of importers, active wine importers, have probably peaked in 2017, 2018, and is now starting to decline. Most of the importers, especially for those of you who are interested in to enter in the Chinese market, most of the importers will be located in the key tier 1 cities and along the coast of China, that historically has been the more open and propense area to import foreign goods, not only wine, but foreign goods in general. How does distribution work in this market? Well, this is a very complex picture to paint, and really I've tried to do my level best to put this on a slide, which is very challenging. However, latest estimates for tier 1, tier 2 cities will tell us that the the consumption, the distribution is actually quite spread out and well balanced between what we call on premise and what we call off premise. Um, in terms of the on premise, you have specialists which are really similar to specialized on premise players you will find in markets such as US rather than UK or Italy. And then these will serve tier 1 cities, hotels, international restaurants, fine dining, Chinese fine dining, where wine is widely consumed, and hotel with national contracts. And then the off-premise is much more of a complex picture. So it's really hard to summarize this into a few words, but let's say wholesalers are very important. And actually, one of the key features of managing your distribution successfully within China is really making sure that you have enough. You can control your value chain, and you control your value chain, and that you allocate enough margin along the value chain to make every single layer happy. And a major disruption in this system is due to e-commerce. So e-commerce is actually something which is, usually always mentioned by the media as some sort of, new route to market, uh, which is disruptive and can really work out for specific product categories such as Italian wines. But more often than not, this has proven uh, to be quite far from reality. And at the end of the day, most of the e-commerce platforms will can actually cause you problems if you don't have a way to control pricing and exposure of your key flagship wines in this specific channel. We could really write a book about this topic alone. What are the latest trends in China? On a consumer level, we can certainly see a rise of a new audience. So, younger, newer consumers whose knowledge becomes more evolved and sophisticated. It's a country where probably female drinkers are on the rise and quite important. It's not uncommon to see many female drinkers if you ever enter into a wine bar or a restaurant where wine is widely served. Young professionals who are taking an increased interest in wine. Wine education is really big in China. It's one of the main markets for WSET, for example. And wine education is a hobby. It's also highly sought after as a certification if you're interested to develop a career in the trade. Wine tourism until 2019, which was the time when Chinese could still move around freely without the restrictions. Wine tourism to key iconic wine region had been really widespread and instrumental in creating new ambassadors. Especially Wine of Australia had been really good in promoting Wine Australia and had been really good in promoting their regions in terms of attracting interest and attracting travelers to visit their regions and to promote their brands. So overall, I would say that we can see an increasing sophistication by Chinese consumers who tend to be these days, more attentive to origin and a sense of place. And this is actually a very good news for us when we see ourselves as terroir wine producers in Italy. On the trade, we can see some trends for sure. We mentioned online. So certainly e-commerce, as we mentioned, is quite disruptive and it's becoming very widespread. Logistics in China and until 2019, before COVID hit the country, was really smooth and really easy, and costs were actually quite low. So it's really easy for an e-commerce player in China to develop one case of wine or even one bottle of wine anywhere in the country. We can now see, and this is something that is quite interesting. I was talking to a few of our business partners in Shanghai last week, and they mentioned this point. They see a rationalization, I will say, of retail pricing and margins across the country. So the markups of some players are getting more reasonable, and hopefully wines is going to be slightly more affordable to a larger part of the population, which is still a niche in China. Never forget this. And certainly digital marketing. So we always talk about e-commerce, but we often forget that the possibilities that we now have thanks to technology to interact and to engage Chinese consumers are actually very, very important. And very often,
Italian Wine Podcast, brought to you by Mama Jumbo Shrimp.
this will entail engaging with Chinese promoters that we often call KOL, key opinion leader or influencer. And some of these KOL have been quite instrumental in making sure that some of the brands are, really well received in the market, and some of these achieve some commercial success. When you look at this digital marketing picture, it's very important to be aware of who the main players are in China and how they interact with each other. So we don't really have time today to deep dive into this, but you should know that there are some platforms where you can promote the brand, some other platforms that are more of a sales or retail avenue for your brands, and they all have different models. You have generic marketplaces such as JD. Tmall, and then you also have wine specialists, wine vertically integrated wine retailers such as Yes My Wine or a few more. And WeChat, which is if you deal with China, you'll certainly be familiar with WeChat. You cannot survive without a WeChat account in China. So WeChat is certainly a very important tool in order to make sure that you have your nice, business card or let's say presentation for the Chinese market available. It can really be your brand face on the market. So, what it takes and what sort of brands can be successful in China? I think there's a few key elements that your brand will need. First of all, a serious brand history, something real, something consumers can relate to. A clear value proposition. So, where is your brand position and why and how? It's very important to control your price system within China. So you have to be familiar with concepts such as Chinese value chain, and visual appeal is very important, especially for those brands that don't really have a long history. Things such as packaging, pack types, weight of the bottle, color of the capsules. There's no detail that must all details must be checked, and this is a very important matter for Chinese consumers and trade. Awards certainly help. So if you manage to get good scores and good international recognition by international media, it's certainly a good element. And certainly, once Chinese will be able to travel again, granting them an experience, a 360-degree experience at the winery, it's certainly something which is always very appreciated. This has been very challenging in the past 2 years because they couldn't travel. So some of the wineries that have been really working hard on new media and new retail tools have been trying to develop new experiences. For example, we have been working on virtual reality, which is something which is pretty cool. So our strength, if your brand has what it takes, is your brand equity. The weaknesses in the market are producers, especially Italian producers, are heavily fragmented. On average, we have a very limited understanding of the Chinese market, which is always changing. The only constant thing in China is change. And so far, there's still a very limited demand for premium and super premium wines, which are really the bread and butter of Italian wines, especially, but also of some other key iconic regions from all over the world. Opportunities, we certainly see this trend for wines with a sense of place, terroir wines. We spoke about natural wines. We are seeing a decline on cheaper wine imports, which I personally think is a very good sign. And there's a temporary gap, which is left by the decline of Australian wines. Australian wines have been imposed very high punitive tariffs in the past 2 years, and that is going to stay for the next probably 3 to 4 years. So this is a time when other players such as France, Chile, Italy really have to try to do their very best to capitalize and to grab that market share. And lastly, the development of second and third tier cities that we discussed. In terms of threats, you do have some spirits categories. You have RTD, which are competing really, really heavily, competing fiercely to substitute wine, especially among younger consumers. This is certainly one of the key challenges and the key worries that we face. And there's already a very large number of producers, brands, and SKU on the market. So it is really a time when importers and trade are trying to rationalize and narrow their efforts on a smaller number of items, which could make it difficult if your brand is not in China yet to access the market. Uncertainty, the uncertainty in shipping and logistics, which is something that we experience all over the world, but even more so in China, make it quite hard to plan long term. So concluding today's presentation, I will say, if you want to invest in China, you have to think, first of all, is this the best time? I personally think that March 2023, which is the time when the National Congress Uh, Election process is going to be over. Maybe a timing when things can actually start to open up and change in China. So let's keep our attention span on that. The decline of cheaper wine imports may point to a new era where maybe possibly premiumization will be possible and consumers will be looking for more interesting wines with more character, identity, and a sense of place. And very important, what I call the signification of the wine market. Um, it's gonna be a market which becomes more local rather than international. So having um, some intermediaries or some of your own staff that is familiar with the Chinese language, for example, or Chinese culture is going to be a key. Is going to be a key component of your commercial team structure. That could be something that if you have enough resources, you could possibly afford to have somebody within the winery that can do that, or you can either outsource this to agencies or to third-party intermediaries or agents who can help you with that. But it's certainly going to be key to do your communication in Chinese language. It's English will only get you that far. So it's very important for each single one of you who wants to crack and try to get into the Chinese market to think about this with care, curation, and effort, and try to design and implement your own go-to market plan. And we opened today's presentation with a no winter lasts forever change. So I'm going to close it with another one of my favorite Chinese saying, which is 好事多磨. 好事多磨 is the road to success is very long and painful. And I think this really sums up China in a nutshell. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alberto. And despite all the green pictures you are describing, I think it's still worthwhile. I, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So I want just to support Alberto with our personal experience into the Chinese market and um, basically and give a few piece of advice if that could be possible. Um, Basically, when we approached China, we went by the book, and I think that was really the mistake to go by the book. So we did the good guys. We found the national importers for China. We went to talk to online people, and we felt like our portfolio, the way it was, would have worked in China. And then for a couple of years, we didn't have anybody on the ground because we felt that we could follow the Chinese market from Italy. So going by the books was a mistake. In fact, in the years, we had to change basically our approach and going back and saying, all right, the national distributors doesn't work for us, at least for our model. So we went local. We started to find regional distributors rather than a national guy. Finally, Alberto came on board, so we had somebody in the ground. We had to modify completely our marketing and our packaging. There is a world difference between what we sell in the rest of the world and what the Chinese really like. So I'm sure the ones of you that travel to the Chinese market knows the story. Big bottles, flashy packaging. Um, this is what really works in China. And then we have to approach completely in a different way. So going by the books is not the best solution. You have to be very flexible to approach Chinese market and be ready to change continuously and being continuously flexible if you really want to be successful. The message across is because I hear it, and we have our own frustrations in all these years. Um, you have to figure that we started the Chinese market back in 2008. That was our first shipments to China. And between then and now, we have been through different frustrations. But I, my hope is that we can't quit. You know Murphy's Law? I'm sure many of you have read Murphy's book. You can't quit, you can't win, you can't lose. So this is pretty much what we're facing in China. But we can't quit. You know, Chinese, to me, despite some of the numbers we have seen, is going to become effectively a big market for us. And I'm talking more now for Italian producer, but I think it's going to be a big market for all of us, all producers. We need to be patient. We need to change our way we approach China. We need to understand the culture. We need to have people on the ground, and we need to trust the market. I remember, because I'm old enough, some of the frustrations we had in other markets. But the difference was, and I'm talking especially for Italian producer, that in those markets, everybody was very motivated, everybody was believing in the markets, and many of us put a lot of efforts, a lot of investments into those markets, which eventually, after many years, they paid off. So with China, I don't see any difference. It's frustrating, it's difficult. You have cultural barriers, you have language barriers, and all sorts of practical problems, logistics, pricing, distribution is all there. But we can't quit. China is going to be, for me, a very promising market. And Italy, unfortunately, has only 6% market share.
It's up to 10 now, but
Up to 10.
up to
Okay.
10. So, but you have to consider that Australian wines are gone. So
Yeah, they're
the
dropped.
the pie is much smaller, and therefore this is why some
Yeah,
of
but
the
I
other
don't think
players. Yeah.
Italians are taking advantage of the Australian demand. It's more probably Chilean and other countries. However, I still think is a market that is worthwhile to explore. So my really recommendation is don't quit on the Chinese market. Don't be frustrated. I know it's frustration. I know it's a lot of investments. I know it's difficult, but don't quit, because eventually is going to pays off. And to be honest, Italian wines has been successful everywhere. I see no reason why they shouldn't be successful in China as well. So I think we just need to work harder and don't lose hope. So Alberto, never show these numbers again, would you?
Yeah.
If you have any questions, let's go to question time.
Thank you. I don't know if you have the chance recently to look at into price category, if there is any how price category
Mm.
different price category are moving, because like for example talking to online, which seems promising to many market, and our
Mm.
company for example invested in the online, but then we know that most of the business is I don't know below 50 RMB or below 80 RMB.
Mm.
But in retail, how are the different price category moving, and until which price the consumer is open to afford a bottle of wine, of imported wine?
Mm. Yeah, I think it really depends on on what kind of retail. So when you're looking at different avenues, what you're saying about e-commerce is certainly right. Once your wine is priced above, I will say 100, 150 RMB, which is the equivalent of what 17 euro, 19 euro, um, then your potential um, your potential interest is vastly inferior to what the majority of wine in that channel sells for. It's so on average, wines that are selling really well on that marketplace, on e-commerce marketplace, are cheaper. And by the way, we have a very similar experience. We have invested quite heavily, not heavily, but I will say we invested time in trying to build a more rational e-commerce presence, through flagship stores and that sort of thing, on JD, for example. But the results, I would say, are still quite not to the level that we would have hoped for. On traditional retail, it's really well, the same wine can cost can end up at very different shelf price according to the venue, the location, the retail outlets, whether if it's a tier one or tier two city. But I will say that the main commercial opportunity for the wines that we are hoping to push at this stage will be between 200 RMB to 350, 400 RMB, and that's what most, I will say, if you look at Italian wines, especially what Italian wine connoisseurs are ready to pay for. That's sort of the target. But I'm sorry that today I didn't prepare a slide with the breakdown by segment. But that's certainly a very interesting question. Then if you just look at uh, the global picture, historically in China, wines that are it's a very polarized market. So if you picture your um, let's say if you divide wines by price bracket, and then probably currently the market is very large at the entry range, although we think this is shrinking according to the data that we showed on the charts, and it's also very large at the top. So things such as Grand Cru Classé, rather than iconic wines from regions of the world such as Barolo, rather than Napa, rather than Margaret River, um, which are priced 1,000 RMB and above, or even 1,500, or more than that. We see iconic brands doing really well. So currently, for us, for our wine group at the moment, what's really dominating the market is the icon brands, the icon stars that we have in the group, and at the same time, we can see that there's an opportunity at the lower end, but we don't really tap into that. And I think for Italian brands, it's very difficult to tap into the sort of entry range market. For certainly for brands or for serious wine producers, that's difficult. If you're a bottling negotiant, that it's a different matter. Then you can really work on the sort of uh, suggested retail price point, 50 RMB and and to 100. But for a serious brand, that's a difficult price proposition. If you look at Chinese wines themselves, Chinese real brands, a good bottle of wine in China will cost you no less than 180 RMB. And then if you want to have some good stuff, you probably have to go up to 250, 300 and above. And that's when you start to get like a solid sort of quality. And I believe that's a sort of price point that a real wine connoisseur is ready to pay for a daily wine. Welcome.
Be aware when you approach the online people that you probably have experienced that yourself, but you have to be very careful. It's a double-edged sword. Sometimes online people, and it happens to us in China a couple of times, we're dumping price just to attract attrition and steal datas, and that has damaged us enormously because you can imagine our traditional distributors seeing online those kind of prices was quite scary and it was very hard to fix. So be careful when you talk with the online people.
You were explaining in the presentation that patriotic consumption is also growing. We know that Chinese people are becoming more and more educated and focused on terroir, wines from terroir. Could we imagine the future as categorization of terroir, Chinese terroir, and still an increase of the patriotic consumption?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think, yeah, this is a trend, which is certainly something that we see, and I'm not an expert by any measure on Chinese wines, but if you talk to people in that trade that are more familiar with those sort of items, you do start to see really a sense of place coming through, and you even probably we are not at the stage where they define themselves by crew, by individual sites. Maybe some of them do, but at this stage, some of the Chinese brands that have been investing heavily in their own facilities and vineyards are really trying to up their game, and I think this is going to be a trend to stay. So probably not such a threat in the sense that uh, if you look at wine production in China, it's very hard to be financially sustainable still. So you do need big shoulders and large investments, especially to build your distribution. So I don't really think this is a menace, a threat in the short term, but maybe in the long term, who knows? Things can change. But if you look at OEV data on Chinese vineyards, uh, you see that the large Chinese players are actually divesting and are getting out of grape production. So the mass market Chinese, let's say, grape market for daily drinking wine production is not so financially viable. But certainly, Chinese brands who are positioned at the premium end of the scale will continue to do well and to attract more interest, even outside of China. There's a very large community of overseas Chinese diaspora across Asia, who is quite once again, I wouldn't say nationalist, but they love China, and they like to show their um, sometimes icon wines or icon products of their motherland. So I think this is a trend which is going to stay, and it's not only on wine. I think when we opened the presentation talking about politics and the narrative that the government in China is really pushing for is, you do feel that is more nationalistic driven. There is more of a sense of, you do really need to instill confidence and perhaps the awareness, that your motherland, your people are the best in the world, and that it's it's really more of a cultural uh, aspect that we could be discussing for hours and hours, and it's it's certainly something which you must consider. Yeah.
You have to consider that China, on the paper, is the fourth largest vineyard worldwide with more than 500,000 hectares. However, most of the grapes are table grapes used for food, table grapes. And you have to consider also that probably it's changing now, but at the entry level, uh, a lot of wines was blended with bulk wines coming from Europe, Spain, Chile, a lot from Chile, Argentina, and so forth. So when you drink an entry level Chinese wines, maybe it's not really Chinese wines. There is a little bit of everything in it. So you have to play in a different ground, really.
Please.
I think I wanted to ask you a question about how the domestic wine production impact the market, but I think you already kind of expanded on that, articulated a little bit now with the last questions. But my big question would be, what's the impact of counterfeition wine, fake wines, or counterfeited wines on the market for?
Yeah. I think the impact of counterfeit wine is something that if you're really positioned in a very ultra luxury premium niche, and if you are, for example, a GCC trader, and or if if your brand is really super well known, but there's only a handful of those brands in China. You're looking at the Premier Clos Classé, for example. You're looking at some of the second growth. You're looking at some icon wines from Australia for one specific brand. Then that still has some sort of impact. It's not gone. It's gonna be there forever. I don't think that the commercial impact is so important at this stage. I mean, we've seen you. There's always going that factor is always going to be there. But I think it's probably over covered and overplayed by international media, um, to some degree. I don't know if this answers your question. Yeah, I think for average brands, for those that have some sort of success in China, it's not really that. Um, it's not really a problem. It will take. My take on this is, what the day I will see my wines, our wines, um, counterfeit in China, that's going to be a sign that I probably have done a very good job, and our brands is so successful that people will start copying that. Um, but what I have seen at a, talking about our experience,
We,
I
we, we had our share in
yeah
Verona of counterfeit wines, especially Amarone, that probably, as you know, is very popular in China.
yeah
And sometimes it's not even done in China, it's done in Italy by sometimes Chinese people, sometimes other people. Uh, it's hard to put a value or a disruptions of the business on that. One, he was says that 30% of the wine and spirits around China was counterfeit. I don't believe in that numbers. I think it's too excessive. But unfortunately, it only takes one scandal or let's say article that is you could ruin your job for 10 years trying to establish an appellations or a brand. So definitely it's something that is
Mm.
to look after.
Yeah, I think you have a very good point. Rather than the counterfeit wine, it's more about, I think, some disputable choices that some of the producers across some region have taken over the years, and we have seen wines coming out of Italy mimicking names of appellation, mimicking names of famous producers, just with a different letter or with a different small logo, the dot on the I missing, and this is our own doing. So this is not the Chinese doing this. It's our our neighbors or other wineries around Italy or around other countries that have been playing a foul game, as far as I'm concerned.
We have been fighting for years and spending a lot of money as a consortium della Policella to fight this. And I'm so impressed by the level of creativity in trying to mimic the names of Amarones or Ripasso. I've seen pretty much everything, and it's very hard to fight them, because you have to go to court, you have to wait years before you have a feedback. So it's really hard to fight.
We have another question, please.
Yeah. What is the role of OCM funds in building a market for Italian wines in China? Thank you.
Can we stop the presentation here? No, thank you for raising that point. It's a very articulate subject. I think it really depends on how that is managed. For our job has been quite instrumental to make good use of those funding. I think it could be a terrific tool and avenue as long as you have your proper planning in place and you're doing real activation on the market, which is not always the case. Once again, I don't know, Andrea, if you want to add up anything to that point, but
Again, we have seen a lot of different bad case scenario on OCM fundings. As a matter of fact, European community and even the Minister of Agriculture in Italy has become, and the regions, because they're all part of the OCM schemes anyway, and you have to report to all of them. First of all, for us company, to work on OCM is becoming increasingly more difficult and complicated and with a lot of bureaucracy. Um, and secondly, I think in the past, unfortunately, some of the funds were not spent in a positive way. Let's put it so, and that's why now is becoming more and more difficult to work on OCM funds. We don't even know what the European community is going to do with that. To be honest, there is a lot of discussions at the level of the agriculture commissions whether to bring back the funds or part of the funds to support farmers rather than support markets. The question is on the table, so we need to understand where we're going to go. But yes, theoretically, OCM is a great help and support for company as long it's the money is going to be spent in a correct way. But we have seen a little bit of everything there too.
yeah. So it's a mixed batch.
Good morning.
Last question.
Hope it's a good question. So, my personal advice, and then I come to a question, is to follow a lot the politics, because in China politics is very important. For example, Guo Chao, people who like to drink something that respects their culture, China culture, until now has been done very little. So first of all, and then for example, KUC or KOL, you will see they will disappear because the government decided so. So the government counts very much. And then this also comes to logistic. Cheetah numbers, quarantine containers. Container have to quarantine 2 weeks. So the logistic is very important. My question is, how did a very famous winery like Sartori adapt to the market? Because you have to adapt to the market. You have to make products the Chinese drink. You don't have to bring whatever products you have. So adapt to the market. What did Sartori very famous? Thanks.
Well, the first mistake we made, because we had no experience at all on the Chinese market, and we rely mostly on our distributors then, let's say importers, which by the way was owned by biggest company in China, COFCO, one of the largest, and by the way, owner of Great Wall, number 2 winery, second largest winery, Great Wall, I would say. So we thought we got it. We are in bed with COFCO. We are in bed with the owner of Great Wall. They have a zillion salesmen around in the market. They are in every supermarket. Bingo. Forget about it. we we it was the most difficult exercise we ran because COFCO was consistently changing people, so we didn't have a point of reference. And when they place the first order, they include also a couple white wines, respectively a Pinot Grigio and Soave. And we didn't know the Chinese market is what, 95% red wine? Okay, let's say 80%, then you have sparkling wines and so. And so we made a mistake in the mix. And to be honest, before we cleaned the inventory of the white wines, we had to wait 3-4 years, something like that.
I think it's still there.
It's still there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's still there, still in the market. So first of all, we had to adapt the portfolio to what the Chinese really drink, which is red wines, but not just any red wines. It's big wines, Amarone-like, Ripasso-like, Appassimento anyway kind of style. So we had to focus and change our portfolio in that directions. And then we came out with a couple wines under the Appassimento style, which is very successful in China. So we had to adapt. We had to adapt our packaging. Our packaging, our standard packaging is too classic. So we had to adapt that too. And then eventually being flexible in our model of distribution, using different people in the different regions. But we had to revamp and wines and all that.
I think we can close here, Andrea, because we are going overboard. So we don't want Stevie to come here and kick us out. So you have my contacts here. If anybody wants to get in touch, WeChat, LinkedIn, email, feel free to drop a line. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.